Welcome back to Criminal Chronicles, the channel where we delve into the most unsettling and shocking criminal cases from around the globe. The story we are about to unfold is one of the most gruesome and bizarre in recent memory, a case that will test the limits of your comprehension and leave you questioning the darkness that can reside within the human soul. It's a narrative of culinary art twisted into a grotesque theater of horror, a story of a city's darkest secret being served on a silver platter. Before we plunge into the chilling details of what the media would later dub the Meatball murders, I want to ask you to please support our channel by hitting that subscribe button and ringing the notification bell. Your support allows us to continue bringing these important, cautionary tales to light. You won't want to miss what we have coming up. Now, prepare yourselves as we unravel the horrifying tale of 10 human corpses minced and made into meatballs, shocking crimes solved in police investigation. The city of Viridia was a monument to paradox. Its skyline, a serrated edge of Gothic spires and gleaming corporate glass, pierced a sky that was almost perpetually bruised with the color of slate. Rain was the city's lifeblood, slicking the cobblestone alleys of the historic district and reflecting the neon glow of the New Money towers in shimmering, distorted puddles. Viridia's soul, however, resided in its culinary scene. It was a city that lived to eat. From the Michelin-starred temples of gastronomy in the Pearl District to the humble, steaming food stalls in the lower wards, Viridia's reputation as a foodie's paradise was its most prized possession. It was a reputation built on flavor, innovation, and the freshest possible ingredients. But in the autumn of 2024, that reputation was about to be irrevocably tainted by a discovery so vile it would curdle the city's collective stomach. It began not with a scream, but with a clog. A municipal sanitation crew, dispatched to investigate a persistent blockage in a primary sewer junction beneath an intersection in the affluent Pearl District, had exhausted all their standard methods. High-pressure water jets had failed. The industrial-grade auger, a fearsome corkscrew of hardened steel, had whined and ground against the obstruction before its motor began to smoke. Finally, they had no choice but to send down a man. Mickey O'Connell, a man whose sense of smell had been mercifully dulled by 2 decades of working in the city's bowels, was lowered into the muck. The blockage was immense, a greasy, fibrous mass the size of a small car, wedged where 2 arterial sewer lines converged. It was composed of congealed fats, cooking oils, and what he initially assumed was an ungodly amount of illegally dumped butcher's waste. As he began to attack the mass with a specialized cutting rake, he felt a sickeningly familiar snap. It was the sound of bone breaking. He pulled his rake back, and caught in its tines was a small, unervingly white object. He scraped the filth from it with a gloved finger. It was a phalanx, a human finger bone. Mickey, a man who had seen things in the city's underbelly that would make a coroner flinch, scrambled for his radio. "Call the cops," he rasped, his voice tight. "Call the damn cops now." Detective Isabella Rossi arrived on the scene 40 minutes later, her trench coat collar pulled up against the incessant drizzle. Rossi was a homicide detective with 15 years on the force, and the city's perpetual dampness had settled deep in her bones, a constant ache that mirrored the weariness in her soul. She was sharp, cynical, and possessed a mind that could assemble the fractured pieces of a tragedy with terrifying efficiency. Her partner, Detective Frank Miller, a broad-shouldered man whose rumpled suit and weary but kind eyes gave him the air of a man who had seen too much but still chose to believe in the good, was already there, talking to the uniformed officers. "What have we got, Frank?" Rossi asked, her gaze fixed on the open manhole, from which a truly foul odor was now being amplified by the humid air. "A mess, Izzy," Miller grunted. "Sanitation crew found a clog. Turns out it's not just grease and garbage. The ME's preliminary tech just pulled 2 more phalanges, what looks like a piece of a jawbone, and a whole lot of organic matter that isn't animal." Rossi sighed, the sound a small puff of white in the cold air. "So, illegal dumping of medical waste?" "Worse," Miller said, his jaw tightening. "The tissue is minced, ground up, and it's all mixed together. Animal, human. It's a slurry. And there are spices in it. Paprika, fennel, a bunch of other stuff. It smells like a butcher shop's dumpster got hit by a tornado." The initial investigation was a logistical nightmare. The sheer volume of the material retrieved from the sewer was staggering. It took the forensics team, led by the unflappably meticulous chief medical examiner, Dr. Eris Thorne, 3 days to sift, separate, and begin the grim process of analysis. Dr. Thorne was a man who found comfort in cold, hard facts, a necessary trait in a profession that dealt exclusively with the tragic aftermath of human passion and violence. His lab was a sterile sanctuary from the chaos of the world above. In a sterile briefing room that smelled of antiseptic and stale coffee, Thorne presented his initial findings to Rossi and Miller. The large screen behind him displayed complex charts and magnified images of tissue fibers. "What we have," Thorne began, his voice calm and academic, "is a highly processed organic compound. The primary components are porcine, bovine, and avian tissues. Pork, beef, and chicken, for the layman. However, interspersed throughout this matrix, we have confirmed the presence of human DNA. Not from one individual, but from multiple. So far, we have isolated distinct DNA profiles for at least 7 different people. Given the total mass, I estimate we are looking for no fewer than 10 victims." A heavy silence filled the room. 10 victims. Not a single murder, but a massacre. "The human remains have been subjected to the same process as the animal tissues," Thorne continued, clicking to a new slide. "They've been professionally butchered, stripped of all identifying features like tattoos or significant scars, and then put through a coarse-grade industrial meat grinder. The bone fragments we've recovered are all small, consistent with what would pass through such a machine. The pieces we found in the initial clog, like the mandible fragment, were likely from a part of the machine that was improperly cleaned, a fluke." "What about the spices?" Rossi asked, leaning forward. Her mind was already racing, building the framework of the killer. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was industrial, methodical. "Ah, the spices," Thorne said, a flicker of academic curiosity in his eyes. "This is where it becomes particularly unique. It's a complex blend. We've identified black pepper, fennel seed, paprika, garlic powder, but also some more esoteric components. Grains of paradise, sumac, and this." He clicked again, showing a microscopic image of a flake of dried pepper. "Capsicum chinense, a variety known as the aji carapita. It's a small, yellow pepper native to the jungles of northern Peru. It's not common. It's expensive, prized for its unique, fruity flavor. It's not something you'd find in a typical sausage factory. This is a gourmet spice blend." The implication hung in the air, as pungent as the spices themselves. This monstrous human-animal slurry had been seasoned, prepared, as if for consumption. The investigation pivoted. The location of the clog in the Pearl District was the only lead they had. The district was home to over 100 high-end restaurants, exclusive butcher shops, and gourmet food importers. The killer, they reasoned, had to be among them. They were hunting for a butcher, a chef, someone with access to industrial grinders, a deep knowledge of meat processing, and a taste for exotic Peruvian peppers. Rossi and Miller began the grueling work of knocking on doors and asking questions. They were met with a wall of polite but firm resistance. The chefs and restaurateurs of the Pearl District were a proud, insular community. They viewed the police intrusion as an affront to their artistry and a threat to their business. They closed ranks, their lawyers answering questions with carefully worded statements. Waste disposal logs were produced, all in perfect order. Suppliers were vetted, all with impeccable records. It was a world of polished steel, crisp white aprons, and sharp knives, and it kept its secrets well. Days turned into a week, and the case grew colder. The media had caught wind of the story, plastering sensationalist headlines across the newsstands. "Sewer of souls. The cannibal clog." The public was horrified, and pressure on the department was mounting. Rossi felt the familiar weight of a case stalling, the ghosts of the nameless victims whispering in the back of her mind. They had the what 10 minced corpses. They had the Howen industrial grinder. But the who and the why remained terrifyingly blank. During their canvass, they came to Elysian Bites, a restaurant that had become the darling of Viridia's culinary scene. It was known for its daring, avant-garde menu and its enigmatic chef-owner, Julian Croft. The restaurant was a sleek, minimalist space of dark wood, soft lighting, and brushed metal. It exuded an aura of confident sophistication. Julian Croft himself was the embodiment of his restaurant. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a smile that was both disarming and unervingly confident. He welcomed the detectives with a practiced, easy charm, offering them espressos and answering their questions without a hint of defensiveness. "Detectives, a pleasure. Anything I can do to help," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. "A terrible business, truly. A stain on our entire community." He presented his records willingly. His waste was handled by a certified bio-waste company. His meat suppliers were the best in the city. He walked them through his gleaming kitchen, a marvel of modern culinary technology. Everything was spotless, organized with an almost fanatical precision. "Do you use Aji Karapita peppers in your cooking, Mr. Croft?" Miller asked, his eyes scanning the shelves of neatly labeled spice jars. Croft's smile didn't falter. "Of course, detective. A magnificent ingredient. We use it in our Amazonian boar sausage appetizer. It provides a wonderful citrusy heat. We import it directly from a specialty purveyor in Lima. Would you like to see the invoices?" He was perfect. Too perfect. Rossi felt a prickle of unease, a familiar gut feeling that had served her well over the years. There was a practiced stillness to Croft, a level of control that felt less like professional composure and more like a carefully constructed performance. But a gut feeling was not evidence. They had nothing to tie him to the crime. His name was just one on a long list of chefs who used the rare pepper. As the restaurant interviews continued to yield nothing, a different department provided a potential breakthrough. A data analyst in missing persons, running a new algorithm, flagged a statistical anomaly. Over the past 6 months, a dozen individuals had been reported missing from the districts surrounding the Pearl District. There was no obvious pattern at first. They were different ages, genders, and ethnicities. But the analyst had found a common thread. They were all people on the fringes of society. Transients, runaways, undocumented workers, individuals with no close family, no social media presence, no one who would make a loud noise if they suddenly vanished. They were ghosts in the system, people who could disappear without leaving a ripple. The timeline of the disappearances corresponded with the estimated time frame of the murders. Rossi and Miller now had potential names for their 10 nameless victims. They were no longer an abstract number, but people who had lived and breathed, now reduced to a seasoned slurry in the city's sewers. The pressure intensified. The two investigations, the sewer remains and the missing persons, were now officially linked. Rossi found herself staring at the photos of the missing, their faces looking out from cheap ID photos or grainy CCTV stills, and felt a renewed surge of cold fury. This wasn't just murder. It was erasure. The killer had chosen victims they thought no one would miss. One rainy evening, Rossi was in her office, long after everyone else had gone home. The case files spread across her desk like a grim tarot reading. Her phone buzzed. It was Dr. Thorne. "I have something, Isabella," he said, his voice devoid of its usual academic detachment. There was an edge to it she had never heard before. "It's about the spice blend." "What about it?" "I was running a more detailed analysis with mass spectrometry. It wasn't just the pepper. The salt used in the blend. It's a specific kind. Himalayan pink salt, which is common enough. But this salt was cut with something else, a mineral impurity. I've cross-referenced it. It's a custom blend, supplied to only a handful of establishments in the city as a signature product. It's meant to provide a unique mineral-rich flavor profile." Rossi sat bolt upright, her exhaustion vanishing, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. "How many establishments, Eris?" "4, Dr. Thorne replied. "I'm sending you the list now." Rossi's computer pinged. She opened the file. Her eyes scanned the list of 4 restaurants, her heart hammering against her ribs. And there, at the top of the list, was a name that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. Elysian Bites, the perfect chef, the pristine kitchen, the disarming smile. The unease she had felt in Julian Croft's presence returned with the force of a physical blow. It was no longer just a gut feeling. It was a lead, a single, slender thread in a web of unimaginable horror. And Rossi knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was about to pull on it and unravel a monster. The thread was thin, but it was all they had. The custom salt blend, a seemingly innocuous detail, was the first real crack in the killer's meticulous facade. For Detective Rossi, it was the scent of blood in the water. The investigation, which had been a wide, sweeping net cast over the entire Pearl District, now began to constrict, its focus narrowing with chilling intensity on one man, Julian Croft. The next morning, Rossi and Miller convened a small, trusted team in a secure briefing room. The name Elysian Bites was written in bold red letters on the whiteboard. Underneath it, they began to build a new profile of their suspect. He was not just a butcher or a chef, he was an artist, a connoisseur. Someone who would go to the trouble of sourcing a rare Peruvian pepper and a custom blended salt for his grotesque creations. This was not about efficiency. It was about aesthetics. The horror of the crime was rooted not in chaotic rage, but in a calm, culinary precision. Their first move was to place Julian Croft under 24/7 surveillance. 2 unmarked cars were assigned to his movements, and a tech team began the process of obtaining warrants for his phone records and financial data. The surveillance was, at first, maddeningly mundane. Croft's routine was as precise and predictable as a metronome. He left his minimalist loft apartment at 5 a.m. every morning, drove to the city's largest wholesale market, and spent 2 hours meticulously inspecting produce, haggling with fishmongers, and conversing with butchers. He was a respected figure there, known for his discerning eye and his passion for quality. He would then proceed to Elysian Bites, where he would spend the next 12 to 14 hours running his kitchen, a calm commander in a storm of culinary creation. After service, he would have a single glass of wine at the bar, chat with his staff, and drive home. He had no family, and his social life seemed to revolve entirely around his restaurant. "The guy's a monk," one of the surveillance officers reported after 3 days. "If he's a monster, he's the most boring monster I've ever seen." But Rossi knew that monsters often wore the most convincing masks of normality. She saw Croft's rigid routine not as boring, but as a form of extreme discipline. It was the same discipline that would be required to plan and execute the abduction, murder, and processing of 10 human beings without leaving a trace. While the surveillance team watched Croft's every move, Miller, a bulldog when it came to paper trails, began digging into his past. What he found was a carefully curated, but ultimately shallow, history. Julian Croft had seemingly appeared in Viridia 5 years ago, with enough capital to launch one of the city's most ambitious restaurants. His official biography claimed he had spent his formative years traveling through South America and Europe, honing his craft in various unnamed kitchens. There were no culinary school records, no tax returns prior to his arrival in the city, no digital footprint to speak of. He was a man who had meticulously crafted his present while erasing his past. Miller's financial deep dive, however, yielded the second crack in the facade. While Croft's business accounts were pristine, his personal accounts showed a strange pattern. Every month, he would make a cash withdrawal of exactly $10,000. The money was never deposited elsewhere. It simply vanished. It was too much for daily expenses, and there were no corresponding large purchases. It was a financial black hole. Then came the discovery that truly electrified the investigation. While cross-referencing property deeds and corporate ownership records, a diligent analyst on Miller's team found something hidden beneath layers of legal jargon and shell corporations. Julian Croft, through a holding company named Terrestrial Provisions LLC, owned an industrial warehouse in the city's dilapidated southern docklands. It was a forgotten part of Viridia, a place of rusting cranes and empty lots, far from the polished sophistication of the Pearl District. The warehouse's official purpose, as listed on the city permits, was culinary experimentation and long-term dry and cold storage. A warehouse, It was the missing piece of the puzzle. A restaurant kitchen, even one as large as Croft's, was not a place where one could butcher 10 bodies unnoticed, but a private, secluded warehouse in a part of town no one cared about. It was the perfect kill room, the perfect abattoir. The pressure to act was immense, but their case was still circumstantial. They had the spice, the salt, the suspicious finances, and a secret warehouse. They could place Croft in the geographical area, and they knew he had the skills. But they had no direct physical evidence linking him to the victims or the remains found in the sewer. A raid on the warehouse was a high-risk gamble. If they went in and found nothing but boxes of imported olive oil, Croft would be alerted, and the case could be lost forever. Rossi needed something more, something personal, something from inside Croft's world. She decided to revisit the employee records from Elysian Bites. They had already interviewed the current staff, all of whom were fiercely loyal to their charismatic boss. They painted a picture of a demanding but brilliant chef, a mentor who pushed them to achieve culinary greatness. But Rossi wasn't interested in the current staff. She was interested in the ones who had left. She cross-referenced the names against police databases and social media, looking for any sign of discontent. She found him on the third day of searching, a young man named Leo. He had worked as a dishwasher at Elysian Bites for 6 months before being abruptly fired. His social media profile was filled with angry, resentful posts about the restaurant industry. Leo was a disgruntled ex-employee, the investigators' holy grail. Rossi and Miller found Leo working at a grimy diner on the other side of town. He was thin, nervous, and clearly intimidated by the detectives. At first, he was reluctant to talk, scarred by his experience. But Rossi, with her practiced ability to project both authority and empathy, gently coaxed the story out of him. "Croft, he's a god in that kitchen," Leo began, nervously wiping his hands on his dirty apron. "Everyone worships him, but there's something off about him. He has this philosophy. He would give these speeches to the staff about ingredients, about honoring the vessel and the nobility of consumption." "What does that mean?" Miller asked. "He said that a pig or a cow lives its whole life to end up on a plate, to become part of something greater. He said that was its purpose, its honor. He talked about waste, how society discards so much. He hated waste. It was his biggest thing. Everything had to have a purpose." Rossi felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. "Leo, why were you fired?" Leo's eyes darted around the empty diner. He lowered his voice. "There's a basement at the restaurant, under the main kitchen. It's not on any of the official floor plans. Croft called it his sanctum or his lab. No one was allowed in there, ever. One night, I was taking out the trash, and the door was slightly ajar. I just peeked inside." "What did you see?" Rossi pressed, her voice steady. "It wasn't a wine cellar or a pantry. It looked like a butcher's shop, private one. There was a big steel table with drains, hooks hanging from the ceiling, a massive, floor-standing meat grinder. Way bigger than the one we had in the main kitchen. It looked like a medical lab, it was so clean. But the smell, it was weird, like iron and spices, really strong spices. I just saw it for a second before he came out from a back room. He didn't yell. He just got this look in his eyes. It was cold, so cold. He told me my services were no longer required and that it would be in my best interest to forget anything I thought I saw. I got my final paycheck the next day, in cash with an extra $5,000. I took it. I was scared. I just wanted to get away from him. This was it. The testimony they needed. A secret butchery, an industrial grinder, the intimidation. It corroborated everything they suspected. Leo's story, combined with the financial records, the secret warehouse, and the forensic link from the salt, was enough. That afternoon, Rossi and Miller stood before a judge, laying out their case. The warrant was granted. They now had the legal authority to breach both the restaurant's hidden basement and the warehouse in the Docklands. The operation was planned for the following morning, a pre-dawn raid designed for maximum surprise. As Rossi prepared for the raid, a new piece of information came in that made the blood run cold in her veins. While Miller was formalizing the warrants, the surveillance team tailing Croft reported a deviation from his routine. For the first time in weeks, he had not gone straight home after service. Instead, he had driven to the Docklands. His car had entered the warehouse. An hour later, he left, but he was not alone. The thermal imaging camera on the surveillance drone showed 2 heat signatures in his car. He had picked someone up. They tracked his car to a desolate area under the Westway Bridge, a place where the city's homeless population often sought shelter. Croft's car idled for a few minutes. The second heat signature disappeared from the vehicle. Then Croft drove home, his routine once again restored. A check of the missing persons database revealed a new report, filed just hours earlier. A 19-year-old runaway, new to the city, had vanished from a shelter not far from the Westway Bridge. He had become victim number 11. Croft wasn't just a killer, he was an active predator. And he was getting bolder. The chapter drew to a close with the city shrouded in the deep, inky blackness that comes just before dawn. A convoy of black tactical vans moved silently through the sleeping streets, converging on the rusting, corrugated steel shell of a warehouse in the southern Docklands. Detective Isabella Rossi stood in the cold, damp air, pulling on a tactical vest over her jacket. She could see her breath in the faint glow of the van's interior lights. Beside her, Frank Miller chambered a round into his shotgun, the sound echoing with grim finality in the quiet street. They were about to kick in the door to a monster's lair. They had a warrant to search for evidence of a crime. But Rossi knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the core, that they were not just raiding a warehouse. They were descending into hell. The command was a single, sharp word: breach. A heavy battering ram, wielded by 2 burly SWAT officers, slammed into the warehouse's corrugated steel door. The metal screamed and buckled. A second impact tore the lock from its housing, and the door flew inward, crashing against the concrete floor. The tactical team poured in, a disciplined swarm of black armor and automatic weapons, fanning out into the cavernous space. "Police, show yourselves!" The team leader's voice boomed, echoing off the high, steel-beamed ceiling. The warehouse was silent. The only sound was the drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere in the darkness and the crunch of the officers' boots on the dusty floor. As the powerful beams of their flashlights cut through the gloom, they revealed the true purpose of Julian Croft's secret sanctuary, and it was a vision of pure, unadulterated horror. The space was divided into 2 distinct areas. The first, near the entrance, was a chillingly staged living quarter. A single mattress lay on the floor, next to a small pile of worn clothing and a backpack. This was the holding area, the place where Croft had kept his victims. The second area, which comprised the bulk of the warehouse, was what Leo the dishwasher had glimpsed in the basement, but on an industrial scale. It was a state-of-the-art human processing facility. In the center of the room stood a massive, stainless steel table, easily 10 feet long, with deep grooves leading to a drainage hole at one end. Above it, a heavy-duty electric hoist was mounted on a ceiling rail, with a set of menacing steel hooks hanging from it. To the side were 2 industrial-grade meat grinders, one for coarse, one for fine, and a commercial sausage stuffing machine. Along the far wall were 3 walk-in freezers, their powerful generators humming quietly in the otherwise silent room. Everything was immaculately clean, scrubbed and sterilized to a surgical standard. There was no blood, no visible gore, but the entire space reeked of bleach and cold iron. Rossi felt a wave of nausea. This was not a crime scene, it was a factory for disassembling human beings. While the main team cleared the building, Rossi, Miller, and a forensics crew moved toward the freezers. Miller pulled open the heavy door of the first one. A blast of frigid air washed over them. The freezer was filled with neatly packaged and labeled parcels wrapped in white butcher paper. The labels were simple, written in Croft's elegant, precise handwriting: bovine brisket, porcine shoulder, avian thigh. Rossi pulled open the second freezer. This one was different. The packages were labeled with dates and codes. She picked one up. It was heavy, frozen solid. Her gloved fingers tore at a corner of the paper. Inside was not the familiar marbling of beef or the pale pink of pork. It was human tissue, neatly butchered, trimmed of fat, and frozen. The third freezer held the victims' identities. It was filled with plastic bins, each one containing the personal effects of a missing person. Worn wallets, faded photographs, cheap jewelry, tattered identification cards. The faces of the people from the missing persons reports stared up at them from their plastic tombs. It was a methodical catalog of erased lives. They found the backpack of the 19-year-old runaway from the night before in a bin that was still empty, waiting to be filled. They were too late. Julian Croft was gone. An all-points bulletin was issued for Croft, and his face was splashed across every screen in the city. The news of the butcher's warehouse broke, and a wave of revulsion and panic swept through Viridia. The city that prided itself on its culinary palate was forced to confront the fact that a monster had been living in its midst, a monster who had turned the sacred act of cooking into the ultimate desecration. In the warehouse, as forensics teams painstakingly documented the gruesome evidence, Rossi found something else. A small, soundproofed office in the back. On a simple desk sat a laptop and a stack of leather-bound journals. The journals were Croft's manifesto. For hours, Rossi sat in the cold office, turning the pages, descending into the twisted labyrinth of the killer's mind. The journals were filled with a chilling mix of culinary philosophy, pseudo-intellectual ramblings, and narcissistic justifications. Croft saw himself not as a murderer, but as an artist and a savior. He wrote of the unwanted, the human waste that society produced and discarded. He believed he was giving their pointless lives a purpose, a glorious transfiguration. All flesh is merely protein awaiting a purpose, he wrote. The pig in its sty, the transient in his alley. They are vessels of unrealized potential. Society sees them as refuse. I see them as the base ingredients for a masterpiece. To consume them, to incorporate their essence into a dish of exquisite beauty, is to grant them an honor they could never achieve in their own meager existence. It is the ultimate act of recycling. It is the last supper they could never afford. He detailed his methods with a chef's detached precision. The stalking of his prey, the swift and silent abductions, the humane dispatching, the butchery techniques he had perfected to maximize yield. He even critiqued his own work, noting which vintages victims had a better flavor profile. It was the detached, arrogant rambling of a man who believed himself to be a god in his own crimson kitchen. As Rossi read, a dreadful realization began to dawn. Croft was a malignant narcissist. He was an artist who needed his work to be seen, to be appreciated. He wouldn't just run and hide. That would be an admission of failure. His entire philosophy was built on the idea of presentation, of turning the grotesque into the gourmet. He had one last act to perform. He's not running, Rossi said, looking up at Miller, her eyes wide with a terrifying certainty. He's preparing for his encore. The finale. Where? Miller asked. The one place he considers his stage. The one place he would feel the need to give his final performance. Rossi was already on her feet, grabbing her coat. Elysian bites. They raced across the city, sirens wailing, to the now famous restaurant in the Pearl District. It was surrounded by yellow crime scene tape and guarded by uniformed officers, a morbid tourist attraction for the city's horrified citizens. Rossi and Miller burst through the doors, their guns drawn. The main dining room was empty, the tables still set with pristine white linen and polished silverware. But from the kitchen, they could hear the soft, melodic strains of a Vivaldi concerto. They moved cautiously toward the kitchen doors. Peeking through the small circular window, Rossi saw him. Julian Croft was standing at the main prep station, dressed in immaculate chef's whites, a freshly starched apron tied around his waist. He was calmly chopping vegetables with a large chef's knife, his movements fluid and economical. He was completely absorbed in his work, a portrait of serene focus amidst the chaos he had created. Tied to a chair in the corner of the kitchen was a terrified young woman, one of his own waitresses. A gag was stuffed in her mouth, and her eyes were wide with terror. Wires ran from the chair to a complex device made of several blocks of C4 explosive, with a single pressure release trigger under Croft's foot. A dead man's switch. If he lifted his foot, the entire block would be engulfed in flames. He looked up as they entered, not with surprise, but with the quiet satisfaction of a performer whose audience has finally arrived. "Detectives," he said, his voice as smooth and calm as ever. "Welcome. You are just in time for the amuse-bouche." "It's over, Julian," Miller growled, his shotgun aimed squarely at Croft's chest. "Over," Croft chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "On the contrary, detective, it is the culmination. My final statement. A critique of a society that consumes without thought, that devours without appreciation. This restaurant, this city, will be my final plate." He intended to die, to take his last hostage and his stage with him, a final, explosive act of artistic arrogance. A standoff ensued, tense and suffocating. The Vivaldi on the stereo seemed to mock the life-or-death situation with its cheerful elegance. Miller was ready to take the shot, but the dead man's switch was too great a risk. It was Rossi who saw the opening. She remembered the journals, the killer's monumental ego. She lowered her weapon slightly. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. The words shocked Miller. "Izzy, what are you doing?" he hissed. "This isn't your masterpiece, Julian," Rossi continued, locking eyes with the chef. "This is a tantrum. It's crude. An explosion. It's the art of a common thug, not a master chef. There's no nuance, no subtlety. Your work, the work you detailed in your journals, that was about precision, about transformation. This is just a mess. Your legacy won't be that of an artist. It will be that of a failed bomber." She saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. His vanity was his weakness. He had spent his life building a philosophy around his art, and she was calling it clumsy, pedestrian. He saw himself as a culinary god, and she was dismissing his ascension as a cheap parlor trick. "My legacy," he whispered, his composure finally cracking. The Vivaldi concerto swelled to a crescendo. That moment of hesitation, that narcissistic injury, was all Miller needed. As Croft's focus shifted inward, his brow furrowed in thought, Miller fired. The blast from the shotgun was deafening in the confined space. It wasn't a kill shot, but a disabling one. The heavy slugs slammed into Croft's leg, shattering the bone. He screamed, a raw, animal sound of pain and shock, and collapsed, his foot sliding off the pressure plate. But the bomb didn't detonate. In his last moments of arrogant planning, he had made a mistake. The trigger was a pressure application switch, not a release. He had to be standing on it for it to be armed. His fall had saved them all. As officers swarmed in, securing Croft and freeing the hysterical waitress, Rossi stood over the fallen chef. The mask was gone. The sophisticated artist was replaced by a pathetic, whimpering man, clutching his ruined leg, his pristine white apron now stained with his own blood. The case was closed. The evidence from the warehouse and the journals was absolute. Julian Croft, the celebrated chef, was exposed as one of the most grotesque serial killers in the nation's history. The city of Viridia was left to heal, to scrub the stain from its reputation, forever haunted by the knowledge of what had been served in its finest kitchens. Months later, Isabella Rossi stood on her apartment balcony, looking out at the rain-slicked city. The case had made her famous, but it had left a deep scar on her soul. She had looked into the abyss, into the mind of a man who had perverted the most basic human act of nourishment into a theater of horror. She thought of the victims, the unwanted, whose only crime